This second experiment is the laser reflector.
Welcome to the Solari Report. My guest today is Dr. Michael Nehls, and this is going to be a highly important interview. It will provide intelligence that will put into perspective numerous details and dichotomies of the events that we have experienced over the last 3 years. I believe this is one of the first interviews that Dr. Michael Nehls is giving about his new book to an English-speaking audience. I have had the privilege of reading your book, Dr. Nehls, and listening to a number of interviews in German over the last couple of months. Now, the English version of Dr. Nehls' book, entitled The Indoctrinated Brain, will come out on December 12th with a foreword by Naomi Wolf. And it will change the mental landscape and fuel many of our upcoming conversations. Once you have understood what Michael Nehls is about to present today, a door to mental freedom and insight opens that cannot be closed again. Dr. Nehls, I am so honored to have you on the Solari Report. I would like to ask you to tell us about yourself, your professional and scientific career, and how you came to write this book. As I understand, this is not your first book, and what you researched about Alzheimer's disease ultimately led to many of the insights that you present here today.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much, Ulrike, for inviting me to this. I'm honored, with talking to you about my discoveries. Well, I really don't like to talk too much about myself, but of course, everybody who listens to us has to have some insight where I come from. So, of course, I studied medicine. I'm a medical doctor, even though I didn't really practice besides, the time I spent with patients during my university career. I was really interested in research and science, and I started my doctoral thesis already in the first year of med school, and published very early significant papers, even the first 2 years of med school, which allowed me to become a doctor in medicine very early. After med school, I went into research, basic research, molecular science research, and the long-term goal was to discover something novel that will save the world. So I tried to find some way to cure the world. Yeah, it was a really big aim, of course, and it's but you have to aim high. The reality will make it smaller anyway.
True.
So I went into basic research trying to discover genes that, if they are mutated, lead to inherited diseases.
Mhm.
And the inherited diseases might give us a clue about the function of the genes and will give us a clue about maybe how we can use the gene to save humanity. Some kind of this is the stone of longevity.
Yeah.
The idea that you find the magic bullet, kind of, which solves all the civilizatory diseases that we encounter, which are the cause of far over 90% of the deaths and the suffering in the modern world.
Mhm.
So that was my aim.
Mhm.
And while trying to do that, I was quite successful in the research, not in the final goal, but at least in the research. We discovered many, many genes which have fantastic novel functions that we didn't know about beforehand. And one of the major genes I found was a gene that is the regulatory gene for our adaptive immune system.
Wow.
And if we don't have it, we don't develop an adaptive immune system. And so I got a lot of insight in immunology during this time. We discovered also genes which are important for brain function. I discovered a gene, if we don't have it, if it doesn't function well, we don't develop, for example, a cerebellum, which is a big part of the brain.
Yeah.
Or I discovered another gene with which I published with a Nobel Prize winner, which if we don't have this gene, we don't develop our inner organs, for example. So very fundamental genes we discovered and got fundamental insights how nature works. And I did a lot of studies also on the evolution of these genes. And so my basic research was really fun. And it was so much fun that actually I was able to develop a company based on my research,
Mm-hmm.
and went into basic research on a level where I really got into contact with the pharmaceutical industry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned over 8, 9 years, or 10 years even, how they function, how they work, and what their goals are. But still sticking, of course, to basic research. So I never developed any drug. So I only developed, or I tried to develop the ideas how a drug could eventually be made based on novel discoveries, based on genomic research.
Wow, that's quite fascinating. You are quite equipped then also to understand what happened during the pandemic. Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. So my research in immunology gave me some insight and some first worries about what's going on, particularly on the adaptive immune system. And but there was also another component, and that came along when I was working very hard as the chief science officer and CEO over 8 years in a Munich company, providing basic research discoveries to pharmaceutical industry. That I myself became kind of a target for these new drugs that I was about to discover. In the long run. I became kind of obese, to be honest.
Okay.
I was close to a heart attack. I had heart problems. I had my blood. My blood was not very good, so the doctor had me closely monitored, and it was clear that my life might be very short, actually. And so I realized I can't wait for the magic bullet to be discovered. I had to change something, and I bought a bicycle. I told my wife we have to have a bicycle. I have to do some sport. I have to change my eating habits, and so on and so forth. And it was about half a year after changing my lifestyle that I had to go again to the doctor, to my regular yearly checkup. And the doctor looked at me, looked at the numbers in the computer for my blood analysis, and looked at me again and said, "Dr. Nehls, did you fall in the fountain of youth? Yeah, yeah. Did you swim through the fountain of youth, or whatever his wording were?" But and the funny thing was, the fountain of youth was essentially the goal of discovery. Where is the fountain of youth? In my
Exactly.
basic research, I tried to find the fountain of youth essentially in our genome, in our genes. That there's somewhere a gene that, if I find it, might deliver the path to eternal youth. But actually, I found the eternal youth kind of eternal, at least for a longer time being. In changing my lifestyle, and that discovery changed completely my life.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, I realized that everything I did so far was actually that I was on the wrong path.
Mm-hmm.
Strictly speaking,
Mm-hmm.
the fountain of youth is not in a novel drug. The fountain of youth is really in lifestyle,
Mm-hmm.
in a life that is more, I would say,
In tune.
yeah, is more in tune with our natural necessities that
Mm-hmm.
came out from evolution. And I did a lot of evolutionary research, so it was clear to me what actually isn't required. And then I realized if I really want to change the health of mankind, I have to go out and give people the help in changing their lifestyle. And I looked at a candidate disease which I could use as a lever, to actually change people's behavior. And the disease I discovered for which I wanted to propose as a life changer disease was actually a disease which was everywhere pronounced as age caused by aging.
Mm-hmm.
It is Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I tackled Alzheimer's disease as a disease which I thought is wrongly accused of being caused by age, but actually caused by our lifestyle.
Very interesting.
And I spent several years actually reading every article I could find on Alzheimer's, basic research based on my background. I could go very deep into even to the genetic level of the disease, but also the lifestyle issues and how life actually changes the likelihood of developing Alzheimer's. And after several years of research, I published a paper which is called Unified Theory of Alzheimer's Disease in Journal of Molecular Psychiatry. And here I propose that Alzheimer's is actually not a disease caused by age. It just requires time to develop. And that's the only reason why there's a correlation between age and the disease. But that is actually purely based on a lifestyle that is not in coordination with our requirements as human beings.
So you discovered it is a preventable disease.
It's absolutely preventable.
Yeah.
And even could be turned around in the early stages based on the mechanisms of the organ that is actually from which in the brain from which Alzheimer's starts, and that's the hippocampus. The hippocampus is our autobiographical memory center, and that's exactly the starting point of the disease. There's an area where the disease starts, and this area is very important for everything that is our personality, our way how we interact with others, with ourselves. It's the center of our being, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And this center is destroyed in the Alzheimer's process, and I could show how we can preserve this center a whole life up to old age. Wow. Instead of becoming senile, actually become older people who have wisdom instead of senility. This area is actually now, and that's why I felt equipped to write the Indoctrinated Brain, because we have essentially two centers of defense as human beings, two centers of defense against outside attacks, and this is all based on the imperative from evolution. And the imperative of evolution says that people have to what is called in the Bible, be
fruitful.
Yeah, be fruitful. Yeah,
yes.
That's how it's be fruitful. But be fruitful, you have to survive first of all. Childhood. And so to become an adult and be fruitful, and that's the imperative. Is also the imperative of evolution. We wouldn't be sitting here, the two of us, exactly, if our ancestors hadn't obeyed to this imperative.
Yeah, I think you will be talking about the hippocampus and how it relates to autobiographical memory and generational memory, which I think is a key also. Before you go on, I'm reminded when you speak about the Fountain of Youth of a very, very good movie. You may have seen it. It's called The Fountain by Darren Aronofsky, and it speaks exactly about the search for the gene of healing all diseases, and then ultimately finding it in the brain, but ultimately in consciousness. So I think this a very good movie.
Yeah, that actually links to it, because consciousness has a lot to do with hippocampal memory.
Exactly.
So that's very close. So going back to this imperative, in order to survive long enough to be fruitful, we have two defense mechanisms: one against microorganisms and one against macroorganisms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because both could be harmful to us. Microorganism, that's our bodily immune system, consisting of our immune cells. And then we have against the macroorganisms. There could be other animals, but of course, usually there are animals which are walking on 2 feet, which are most dangerous to us in reality. And for that, for the danger that comes from these type of animals, we have the hippocampus as our defense, because we are, of course, as human beings, we are in the animal kingdom. We are not the strongest. We are not the fastest. We can't fly. So the only way we had survived as humankind was because of our social abilities, and social abilities reside in our autobiographical memory ability. Only if we remember who we met, if we remember what we have experienced, also if we remember what other people have experienced, to ideas that have been given to us in when we talk to others. All these ideas, so our ability to learn from others, and all the learning, because if somebody tells me something, it tells me one time, and I have to remember instantaneously.
Yeah.
If I have a thought, I have to remember it instantaneously. And the only part of my brain which is able to remember things instantaneously and for long term is the hippocampus.
Interesting.
So the hippocampus is, from my point of view, the center of our macroscopic immune system, of our mental immune system.
Right.
And so when 2020 happened, I saw two immune systems under attack. The physical immune system, the bodily immune system, consisting of our immune cells, and at the same time our mental immune system. And which, and in the meantime, I propose that the mental immune system is probably the primary target of the whole attack. So it was the immune system was just used as the bodily immune system with SARS-CoV-2 was just a means to get to the brain.
Yes. And this is the whole thrust of your book and your discovery, and also why it is so important to talk about this today, because it puts into perspective, as I said, everything that has happened. It takes away from just the immune and microbiotic or microbial danger to something, to another. And you point this out in your book, another plan almost of attacking the mental immune system. And so we can't wait. So can you speak more about your discovery, and what is the hippocampus, and how does it create the autobiographical memory?
Yeah, the hippocampus is a very old structure in the brain. It's only the size of a thumb, at both sides. We have two of them in the temporal lobe, and the hippocampus, as I said already, has the ability, which is unique for the whole brain, to remember instantaneously, long-term, everything we experience. Of course, because it's so small, it's only a thumb in the brain, so to speak, only maybe 1% of the whole mass of the brain. Its storage capacity is not very huge. And so it has to decide what it remembers and what it doesn't remember, because we experience much more than the hippocampus could store during a day. So it is very selective, and the selection is taking place by the selection process. Essentially requires emotion. So it remembers only things that come along with a certain emotion. So it has to strike us as something importance because our body reacts to it. So if I have a great idea, my body feels good, and this good feeling is a sign for the hippocampus. Okay, this needs to be remembered.
I see.
Same, of course, if I'm threatened with something, my body reacts, that emotion, and the emotion of the threat leads to the instantaneous remembering of this threat, so that in the long term I can learn from this threat how I reacted, and of course try to avoid it maybe the next day or the rest of my life. So this importance of is signaled by emotion, and then things are remembered instantaneously and long term. That's how the hippocampus works. But of course, let's put it this way: in order to save, the energy or the ability to remember, we act more or less with what Daniel Kahneman, in what he got a Nobel Prize, with system 1. System 1 and system 2, he differentiated two ways of interacting with the world. And system 1 is essentially our unconscious daily behavior, routines that we have learned, and they don't require any kind of mental energy. And they are constantly active, and that's good. So, we can ride a bicycle while thinking about God and the world, because once we have learned riding a bicycle, and so many things we just do without putting a conscious thought into it, but we do it, and that is what we call system 1. And the system 2 is the actual thinking about things, reacting consciously to certain threats or to whatever we do consciously. We talk about conscious maybe later on, so that's important. Conscious thought is what we call system 2, and conscious thought allows us to change our behavior, because system 1 is the routine behavior that's what we do every day. But if we want to change behavior, we have to act based on system 2. We have to start thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And system 2 has a limited amount of energy. Sorry?
Okay, system 1 would then be the body mind, when the body becomes the mind.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
If we do routines, but we don't remember them. So if my wife and I, for example, go to bed in the evening and we have a candlelight on and on a table in the kitchen, and then ask me when we are in bed, did you, is the candle still on? And I said, well, I can't remember. Did I really blow it out? I mean, did I do it or didn't? And we both can't remember because we do it every day. It's kind of a system 1 action which happens unconscious. And if we don't really do it consciously, because we know we will ask this question later on, then we don't remember, and we have to go downstairs again and actually check. And that's system 1. It is really a learned behavior that is so routine that we don't do it with any conscious thought.
With conscious energy, yes. And system 2 then would be real thought, real decision making, as in a human mind. Yeah,
exactly. A conscious thought, a conscious discussion with ourselves about how we maybe change our life, how we do something the next day out of the normal routine, something coming up and we have to plan it. And complex planning requires the ability to preserve the thoughts, from this thought process, that the thoughts are preserved long term. And there is not enough energy to think the whole day. That's the discovery of Kahneman, for which he got the Nobel Prize, because if we are out of this energy, whatever this energy is, if we're out of this energy, then we just are allowed to work on system 1. Our life would be only routine. And we cannot get out of the routine because we have no energy to engage system 2. So it's very important that we preserve energy for system 2 and activate it whenever we need it, but it can't be active the whole time. And when he got the Nobel Prize, it was in 2002, he discovered essentially as system 1 and system 2 and how it influences decision making. But what was not discovered at the time, and not until a few years ago, was what this energy actually consists of. And that's where I spent the last 10 years trying to identify this energy source. And I think I found it, and I'm now invited actually from the journal of it's Frontiers of Psychology to write an article about this, which I'll do in the next few months.
Wonderful.
On this discovery. And discovery is actually the free synapses in the hippocampus. So the free synapses in the hippocampus are essentially the energy. So every time I do something conscious, I fill up the synapses with the new memories. And of course, once a memory is formed in the hippocampus, then for the next memory that needs to be put into the hippocampus, new synapses are required. And since the synapses are limited at a long day of creative thinking or whatever we do, or social interaction, which usually requires a lot of memorization, because we want to memorize what we talk to people and what we had heard from people, all these activities go into system 2. They go into the hippocampus, are stored synapses are used up at the end of a long day. There are no synapses left to store new information, and that's what we call ego depletion. This is the point where we don't want to engage system 2 anymore, because essentially there are no free synapses for new thoughts. It's very simple.
Do I understand correctly that everything, in a sense, everything that we experience goes first through the hippocampus, and there a kind of a decision is made where and how to treat it?
Yeah, the decision essentially is made in our frontal brain, I guess. The frontal brain is our executive center. There we essentially have all the thoughts in parallel, and we think about them. But the number of thoughts that we can essentially process in parallel are only a few, and they are only spurious, so that they are not long lasting. So they are only essentially kind of currents, active currents of thought that they are not stored for the long term. And without a hippocampus, we wouldn't remember what we thought. So we need the hippocampus to remember our own thoughts. And and if we can't essentially go back and let's assume practically you want to make a decision, you want to change your life, you realize you read my book and you said, okay, Michael says if I do this and if I do that, I will not get Alzheimer's. Okay, but that requires a change of life. My change of life, of course, is not a change for my life, it's also a change of the life of others, because my daily routine will be different, and I will interact with people differently, because their life will also be changed by my change.
Yeah.
And you realize that sooner or later, when you think about that, many thoughts come up, more than a handful, that our frontal brain can actually, work and keep. So the frontal brain is our short-term memory only for a few seconds. And if we are not able to keep the thoughts that are important and compare one way of acting to another way of possibly acting, and compare the outcomes, this is all too much for the frontal brain. So even though the frontal brain makes a decision, it has to rely on the hippocampus to provide all the intermediate thoughts and long-term thoughts that I had, and the different scenarios I planned or I envisioned to make a decision. So the frontal brain makes a decision, but without the hippocampus, it's unable. We cannot plan the future without hippocampal capacity. And so if in a long day, we are running out of capacity, of storage capacity, because we already used up many of the synapses which store the information that we thought, our thoughts and our encounters with other people and everything we experience, then we are what we call ego depleted. Ego depletion is a scientific word for being exhausted, mentally exhausted. And that's where we realize it's time to sleep. It's time to lay down, maybe to do less active thoughts, and just do our routine in the evening, and have a good night's sleep. And when we sleep, the battery, I call it the frontal brain battery, the hippocampus, because it stores the energy. Of course, the energy is not really energy, but it feels like energy, but it really is the free synapses. Then, of course, in the night, something strange happens. The hippocampus recovers. Its storage capacity essentially revitalizes. It comes back again. In the morning, the ego depletion is gone.
Yeah.
We are now allowed again for new thoughts. We can be creative again in the morning. We are happy to engage in social encounters, which we are not happy anymore in the evening when we are ego depleted. So what happens in the night? How does the hippocampus recover? How does it? How is the battery recharged again, so to speak? How is the frontal brain battery, which is the hippocampus, recharged so that the frontal brain can start, planning new thoughts, creating a new life plans for us? This is something that's happening in the night, and there's two important processes that take place that allows the hippocampus to be available again in the morning for new thoughts. And these two processes, there are two. One is an upload takes place. An upload of all the information, everything that we have experienced, to it's uploaded in what I call the neocortical hard disk, in computer speech. The neocortex, in comparison to the hippocampus, which belongs to the arched cortex. Arched cortex means the very old cortex, the early cortex, because it's so old, even reptiles have it already. And the neocortex is something that mammals only have. It's a very late development in evolution. That's why it's called neo. It's new, neocortex. And the neocortex is much, much larger than the hippocampus, and it can store much more information. So at the night, when we sleep, in the deep sleep phase, in the early night phases, the sleep phases, there's an upload taking place. Of course, the neocortex learns slowly. So there's a repetitive upload taking place of the same information until the synapses in the neocortex have transformed to store the information that was originally in the hippocampus. So that's the upload. But not everything is uploaded. Only a part of the information about what I experienced and how it felt.
Mm-hmm.
But the question to when I experienced it and what I and where I experienced it, so the location and the time, is still continue to be stored in the hippocampus. So the hippocampus stores with neurons, specified neurons. We call them time neurons and space neurons. Time and space neurons. And for the space neurons, for example, the Nobel Prize was given, I think, 2015, if I'm correct, for the discovery. And in the same year, I think it was 2016, and in the same year, the space neurons were discovered. So we have the time and the space neurons, and they kind of are the coordinates for recovering the information that has been uploaded in the neocortex. They are required to retrieve the information to make them conscious again.
It's actually quite fascinating, isn't it? So the actual memory is in the neocortex, and it's written several times in the same night. It's written several.
The same night, exactly. Mm-hmm. So that in the next morning, the synapses of the hippocampus can again be used for new information, because the old information is safely stored in the neocortex. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Only then the battery is essentially full again. For full meaning the synapses are available for new system 2 thinking.
But what remains in the hippocampus, and it remains for a lifetime, correct?
Exactly.
Is so to speak the coordinates of where to retrieve from the neocortex.
Exactly, and
the space and time location.
It's kind of an index that is inscribed in these space and time neurons. Mm-hmm. That's why I call the combination of space and time neurons, I call index neurons.
Excellent.
I created this term for my book, but I hope it will be a term that is used worldwide once, because it makes a lot of sense to have index neurons. The index neurons allow us during the daytime to retrieve the information, of course, too, but then, of course, still from the hippocampus. But when the information is essentially uploaded, they still keep the connection and allow us to retrieve this information and make them conscious again if we need to. So if we want to remember what we talked about today, moment index neurons for every thought and every word we are saying or every content we are communicating at the moment, index neurons are using this information. Okay, now at this time, in this setting, time and space, this happened. These thoughts were communicated. They are remembered actually now in the hippocampus. But tomorrow, if you want to essentially reactivate this memory, you have to use the index neurons. You have to remember, okay, I talked to Ulrike at that time during the sun was shining, and it was roughly yesterday, so it was at a particular time. I was sitting here in my office, so it was in this room, and this leads to the thoughts that we have exchanged. So they are the index neurons that allow me to retrieve the thoughts from the day before and make them conscious again.
It's like an invisible mathematical link to the actual memory.
It's a neuronal link.
Geometrical. Yeah.
To allow us to retrieve the information to make it conscious again. Mm-hmm. And there, a second problem comes up now, a second issue for the hippocampus. The oldest woman that ever lived was 122 years old. By the way, she never got Alzheimer's. She was 122 years old and never got Alzheimer's. I published this in one of my books. And she was... many doctors checked her and couldn't believe that she doesn't get Alzheimer's being so old. But the point is, her life was also, in a way, very natural in many ways. But if you become 120 years old, if that is the ability we have, if this is not an exception, but maybe even the ability we have, it could be 100 years, 110 years could be natural actually. Then, if we live in a way that is in accordance with our natural needs, and if we obey essentially nature, then of course we are running out of index neurons. That's the biggest problem, because we don't want to forget old things and by remembering new things. We want to create an ever-growing treasure of information, of experience, to become wise when we grow old. Yeah. And there is actually a logic to that. So in old age, not in nowadays, but in last century, actually the century before last century, in the 19th century, it was actually shown that the longer, for example, a grandmother lives in a family, the more children of her children survive into adulthood, because her wisdom was helpful for the family to survive.
Beautiful.
So old age was actually a selection criterion for the genes being transmitted into the next generations.
Mm-hmm.
So the survival of the genes depended on the age of the oldest. So I called it the evolution of the grandmother in my books. So that there was actually a selection criterion for becoming old, but old only in the sense that you have a certain wisdom, and you are physically and mentally able to help the family, and you're not a burden. So Alzheimer's was not an issue in the 19th century, not even in the early decades of the 20th century.
True.
It was a rarity for Alzheimer himself when he discovered it. And even 20, 30 years later, it was not even in the textbooks of medicine. Alzheimer's disease, it became an issue in the second half of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Gradually, and now it's a severe issue.
Yeah.
So it has to do something with the lifestyle and not with our genetics.
Mm-hmm.
But how is the hippocampus able to store new information 100 years or 100 years or 110 years or even 120 years? How is it able? Well, there's another unique feature of the hippocampus, which is unique compared to all other areas of the brain, and that is its ability to create novel neurons the whole life. It's called adult because it happens usually the production of nerve cells ceases when we are entering adulthood. But there's one area, the entry part of the hippocampus, where the index neurons are, where new neurons are created the whole life. In the 80-year-old people as efficiently as in 18-year-old people. And we call this process adult, of course, hippocampus, neurogenesis, but neuron and genesis for creating neurons. So the adult hippocampal neurogenesis provides new candidates for index neurons for the next day. So we don't have to override the old ones to create new memories. So we don't have to sacrifice old memories for new ones. We can create new thoughts, new ideas every day, the whole life, without sacrificing old ones. So our treasure of wisdom, of information, of life experience grows every year because we have this fantastic process of the adult hippocampal neurogenesis.
What a profound thought, even because it's very empowering, isn't it? Because we are told, the brain, falters with old age, and we tend to forget, and it's just no longer so quick and so fast and so creative. But what you are saying is we can remain creative and remain open to new things because we have that capacity. And even to think about that alone, to also know that we have we do not, as you are saying, sacrifice what we had in use, our memories, just to survive a little longer, is quite freeing. It's a very liberating thought for me. Thank you.
Fantastic. And the process is most productive if we live in a in a life that is in accordance with our natural needs. And
Yeah.
if we do that, not only do we experience this productive process of adult hippocampal neurogenesis, the second process also takes part, which I call the process of reurination. So every nerve cell, for example, liver cells, every few weeks we have a new liver. Liver cells die and new ones are born. So and there's always an exchange, and the liver 3 months ago is a completely different liver than the liver we have now. But the brain cannot change. It has to stay in the way it is for the whole life. You have to think about it. Certain nerve cells in the brain have not only 10,000, maybe even 100,000 connections to other nerve cells via synapses. And these synapses, these connections, is what we are. So, at least to a certain extent. And so, you cannot just take a nerve cell out and put a new one in. That's why, for example, stem cells, as a therapeutic idea, doesn't really work for me, because you cannot put a new cell in, because the new cell doesn't know what the old cell had on connections. So it will change our self if we remove cells and put new ones in. Whatever is created is not us anymore. So in order to preserve ourselves, the nerve cells have to stay young. That means like an old timer. You have an old timer and a car that is 100 years old. From the outside, it looks identical to the car that has been produced. Of course, if it has run for 100 years, the motor might be dead, the gauges might not be working, whatever. You have to change something. Inside, you have to make it young always. After a few years, something breaks internally. In the motor, you have to change it. Batteries have to be exchanged and so forth. But the outside has to stay the same, so that it still looks like it came from the conveyor belt, 100 years
100
ago.
years ago, yeah.
Yeah, and the same goes for nerve cells. They have to reurinate the whole life.
Mhm.
And the same forces in the body that activate this reurination process are the same forces that also lead to an active neurogenesis.
Mhm.
On the other hand, if you live a life that doesn't allow productive neurogenesis, which is our modern lifestyle, you also have not the activated process of reurination. And then really you start aging. So your brain ages because the reurination is stopped. And of course, the neurogenesis is stopped, meaning that the hippocampus is not functioning well. And that's how you experience many old people, even young people, that they are not open for new thoughts. They cannot engage in type 2 thinking and so forth. And there comes another issue. The new cells that are created every night, the creation process happens in the night, in the last phases of deep sleep, in the so-called rapid eye movement sleep. When in the neocortex, the uploaded thoughts are reconnected in a certain way to previous, memories. And this reconnection process happens under, let's say, neuronal laws, which we don't know, we don't understand. But in this reprocessing and reconnection, actually, we become more wise. We see the individual thought that we stored in context to all the thoughts we had of our whole life. So when we wake up in the morning, the thought is not isolated anymore. So whatever I learned yesterday is suddenly more deeply connected to every thought and every experience I had my whole life.
We do
And-
experience that a lot, don't we? When we wake up and suddenly things make sense, or
Exactly.
yeah, or we are fully rejuvenated after a strong day. I tend to forget, when I had an argument, I sleep over it and it's completely gone.
You see the
That's-
new perspective. That's it.
Yeah,
Exactly the point.
exactly.
You realize, well, it was not that difficult actually, or it was not the argument was silly, and because you realize you had maybe other experience before where you encountered similar things and have a new understanding of what happened.
How much, if I may ask before you continue, how much sleep do you need in order for this process to take place?
I mean, you need a certain amount of deep sleep phases. We call it slow wave sleep. And then we need another form of deep sleep in the morning hours. That is the rapid eye movement sleep. Actually, the rapid eye movement is really because this reconnection takes place in our dreams. So we dream actually, and our eyes essentially move in this virtual room of dreaming, and that's why we have this strange kind of sleep, which looks like we are kind of awake almost because our eyes move, even our legs and feet and arms might move a little bit in this virtual room of dreaming. But we are actually in a deep sleep phase. And in this deep sleep phase, neurogenesis can take place because at that point, the upload is already finished and the hippocampus is now free to do something else. Of course, he doesn't have to record anything because we are sleeping. Only if we wake up, of course, then he starts to record the last thoughts of our dream. And usually if we wake up in a dream, you can imagine the only reason to wake up is because there's something horrible happened maybe in the dream. Which makes us waking up. And then, of course, these thoughts are still circling now in our brain, pretty much like thoughts in the frontal brain. They are still active. And that's when the hippocampus, because we are awake, starts to record them. That's, for example, one of the reasons we only remember the end of a dream, but never the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we are woken up. And of course, we are woken up because there's a strong emotion. And the emotion tells the hippocampus, remember, please. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we remember even, that's also the reason why we always feel that we only dream bad things, because we never wake up from a dream that is happy, you know?
Well, I do. But
Yeah, that's good.
that's happened, yes.
Of course, if somebody wakes you up or something, but usually I try to continue sleeping when I'm happy dreams, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that's the process. And another important function I wanted to point out, because it's important for the indoctrinated brain, there's another function. These new brain cells in the entry part of the hippocampus have these new index neurons that become index neurons if we use them, of course. If we don't use them, actually they die. So if we don't use these index neurons, then they have no purpose in life. So they are born at night, neurogenesis, they are born at night. It takes a few weeks until they are matured and could be part of the hippocampal network. But once they are ready to be part of the hippocampal network, they need to be used. If we don't use them, if their synapses are not used, then they actually die. They have in their DNA a death program, we call it apoptosis. And this will be engaged unless the synapses are used. The synapses, the connections to other nerve cells, which form new memories, are kind of a survival signal. That's why I always say nerve cells are kind of social beings. They need to touch other social beings to have a reason to live. And so that's why the new neurons that are produced in the hippocampus are essentially the neuronal correlate of curiosity. They make us curious because that's the only way they can survive. If we don't experience something novel, then the hippocampus will not remember. And because routine, he doesn't remember. That's system 1. Only system 2, novel things will be remembered, novel thoughts, novel discussions, novel experiences. And so that's why these cells want us to be system 2, at least for a few hours a day, to engage in new things, to be curious, to learn something. And if we don't, then these cells die. The other thing is, to be curious, we have to overcome our resistance to novelty. Because novelty, everything that's novel is per se, that's based on our evolutionary history, novel things are potentially dangerous because we don't know them. So we regard everything novel as potentially dangerous. That's natural. It has to be better safe than sorry. So everything novel that we experience will raise our stress system. It will lead to a release of stress hormones because it's novel. Something bad can happen. Of course, when you realize, it's not really bad at all, it's not dangerous, then the stress level has to be reduced again. And that is the task of these index neurons. They experience, of course, the novelty and are in close proximity to all the other index neurons that have our past history essentially indexed. They remember, so they're close to all our memories from the past. And if we practical example, if I'm on my bicycle and a dog barks behind me. Of course, yeah, it could be a dangerous dog, and I'm on a bicycle, it could bite me, so stress goes up. Then I turn around and see the dog and see it's a small dog, and my index neurons from which recorded past history, remember, okay, a small dog on a leash maybe is not dangerous. And immediately the index neurons talk to each other, and the new ones signal to the stress cascade, the hormonal test, turn it off. It's not necessary. You don't have to be, in a stressful state. So new index neurons have so far several,
Yes.
functions.
Yeah.
Count them up. They are the neuronal correlate of curiosity. They are essentially the neuronal correlate of psychic resilience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because if I can't turn off the stress, then I have a low psychic resilience. But since they are able to turn it off, they give us psychic resilience. Actually, all the antidepressants in the world that the doctors prescribe, act through the process of activating neurogenesis. If you turn off neurogenesis in an animal experimentally, the drugs that usually are antidepressants don't work anymore. So neurogenesis is important for drugs to have an antidepressant effect. While on the other side, if you activate naturally through natural lifestyle neurogenesis, have a productive neurogenesis, your psychic resilience is very high, and the likelihood that you develop depression is very low. So that's the second function of the new neurons that are created, of neurogenesis. The third function is that they are the limit of new experience we are willing to do every day. If we don't have index neurons, we wake up in the morning, assume, theoretically, we have no index neuron production at night, then the ego-depleted state of the evening continues in the morning.
Yeah.
Because, of course, even if the upload has occurred, we have no new index neurons to make new memories.
Yeah. And we have no curiosity, no courage, no,
exactly.
No wisdom also, as you're saying.
Our wisdom will shrink, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever wisdom we had, it will start to shrink, because whatever we experience, if we want to preserve the thought, has a cost of deleting essentially previous memories.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing. And so we have now three important issues. They are required for system 2. They are the limit essentially for our ability to think critically and creating a new lifestyle and be curious. And of course, not to be anxious about changes or even anxious about thinking about things. So if we talked about where is the center of our mental immune system, the center is actually the production of new cells in the hippocampus. Adult hippocampal neurogenesis are essentially the key to have a strong mental immune system. Or if I put it in other words, if I want to destroy somebody, if I want to conquer a society, the thing I have to do is to completely shut down the neurogenesis in the hippocampus. Then I have a society of people who are anxious, who I can lead with fear-mongering, who don't ask questions, who are not curious anymore, and who are not questioning essentially what's going on, because they cannot. And worst of all, and this is the most important part of my book, if I still instill them with narratives of fear about what's going on in the world, perma-pandemics, wars, atomic war, climate change, everything will destroy the world. If I instill these thoughts on and on and on, of course, the hippocampus has to remember. They come with strong emotions. So the hippocampus has to remember these things. But of course, neurogenesis, if I had targeted it in the right way, that it's not happening, then of course, these new thoughts can only be stored in the hippocampus, these fear thoughts, by overriding memories of my past. So my personality starts to shrink. My individuality starts to shrink. And as I pointed out in my book,
to the last few years of overwhelming fear, information and end of the world scenarios. And it shrinks ever more to only that. That's wow.
Yeah. So what I looked at it from the point of Brave New World, to be honest. I read Brave New World as a child. And at the same time, I read also, or a few weeks later, I was engaged in 1984. And while 1984 seemed to me plausible at the time, Brave New World didn't seem to me plausible. And but I realized suddenly, if you really want to dominate people in a Brave New World, it's done by, for example, having the children being produced in flasks, in bottles. And the thing they did is they removed oxygen to harm the brain. Brain portion, the most susceptible part of the brain to reduced oxygen is the hippocampus.
Wow.
And then of course you instill all these thoughts. Every night they had this, this process that when the children were sleeping, they got through their pillow, constantly this information about how the world is perfect and so forth, that the narrative was installed in the brain. And I asked myself, how can you do that if there's already a narrative or a personal history evolved in people? Well, you can do it still. You can still create the same process. What you have to do is you have to stop index neuron production. Then you have to install this fear information that forces the hippocampus to override your old history, to reduce your individuality. And if you do this for a few years, the society, the people individually, but our society becomes essentially a unified structure of people in like described like in Brave New World.
Yeah.
And that really made me worry about what's going on.
So, and this is all quite mind-blowing, and I do think that listeners are having insights now and eye-openers. You then analyzed the pandemic measures that were rolled out literally worldwide. I mean, this alone makes a thinking person suspicious that every country does the same at the same time. And you found in all of the measures that they all target the neuronal genesis of the hippocampus. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's what I already pointed out in 220, the first year, that the hippocampus is extremely harmed by the measures. Because when I talk about what is required for natural growth of the hippocampus lifetime, there are certain things that our body requires. And they come all from old age, from Stone Age, essentially. How we live there defines how we should actually live today. Of course, we don't have to go into a cave or sit on trees, and hunt with a spear, But of course, there are certain requirements, and certain requirements are, for example, just to give you a few examples. One example would be in the Stone Age, if we are hungry, we have to go out of the cave and actually go and walk around and find food, and walking around means that you make new experiences, more experience than sitting in a cave. So we make experience while we are moving around. And everybody who does sport knows if he moves around and does sport, is physically active, there's a training effect. You become more apt to more physical activities. But this adaptation to physical activity, becoming more able to be physically active, the training effect is transmitted through hormones. A lot of hormones are there, over a dozen identified, which are important for physical training. Interestingly, all these hormones I found are activators of hippocampal neurogenesis. So physical activity is not only a signal to our body, become better and more apt to physical activity, to physical strain. No, we also, our brain, it's a signal to our brain, oh, this person is physically active, so he makes experiences. And if he makes experiences, it's better his hippocampus to grow, so that his experiences are recorded better. So we can envision, if, just to give an example, if you take older people, let's say 70 years plus, from a home, and ask them to walk an hour a day, compared to a group who doesn't walk an hour a day. After 1 year, this was actually published, is in my book. After 1 year, the hippocampus of the group which walked just 1 hour a day, compared to the group which didn't walk, was a growth of the hippocampus by 2%.
Wow.
2% in volume. The group which didn't walk had a shrinkage of the hippocampus by 1.4%. So there was almost a 3.5% difference in hippocampal size after 1 year of walking versus non-walking.
Mm-hmm.
Just to give you a feeling for how important it is that we walk. Mm-hmm. Now, 2020 came, and suddenly people were not allowed to walk anymore outside. Yeah. Sport clubs were closed. Children had no schooling in the school, no sport schedule anymore. Things changed.
Yeah.
And another thing that is very important, even if we're in a cave, sorry, not in a cage, in a cave.
As well, yes.
Yeah, in a cave, yeah. In the Stone Age, we work together with other people. We are social beings. So, stories were told, and old people tell young people their life experience and make them more experienced, so that they don't have to do the same thing, the same failures that maybe the old people survived. They don't have to do them again and hope to survive them. We learn from experience and are more able to survive our life, because we are provided with stories from other people who gave us clues how to act better, and then if we had to do it on our own without any previous experience of others. So social learning is very important. And every time when we are together with people, another hormone is provided to our body, or provided by our body to our brain. That's oxytocin. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly, but oxytocin is a hormone released when we're in social contact with other people. And it makes us feel well with other people. But oxytocin is the most potent activator of adult hippocampal neurogenesis.
Fascinating.
That's why I call social distancing unsocial distancing. It's really unsocial, because it depletes us from oxytocin. Mm-hmm. And so I already published a book in 2021, early 2021. It's called The Exhausted Brain, in German, The Exhausted Brain. And here I predicted that the measures we experienced in 2020 would increase the depression rates and the Alzheimer's rates. Alzheimer's is ultimately an hippocampal disease. And that's why I call it also hippocampal dementia. And it starts actually in the area where neurogenesis takes place. And if you have a lifelong of reduced neurogenesis, then the hippocampus doesn't grow, it shrinks, like in the example I've given to you. And it actually, the 1.4% shrinkage rate is a normal shrinkage rate in our society. That's a normal shrinkage rate. And the clinical feature of this shrinkage rate is depression and Alzheimer's in the long term. And the depression rates were higher than ever in summer 2019 already.
Yes.
And in 2020, they increased in America. It was a huge study, threefold. So from the highest level ever recorded in mankind's history in 2019 summer, we had increase even in 2020 due to the measures. Not due to the virus. The measures were sufficient to actually deplete our brain from neurogenesis and make us ego depleted and willing essentially to accept all these things that happen to us.
That's an important point too, because this malleability of the personality, of the autobiographical memory, actually then makes us more prone to accept the, let's say, propaganda or whatever narrative is put before us. So that is a reinforcement loop, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a devil's cycle, essentially. Yeah. It's a devil's cycle because the fear-mongering, on a brain that has a low defense, low mental defense, low psychic resilience, leads to a lot of stress on the brain itself. The brain cells release factors which activate the immune system. These factors that are released we call DAMs, danger-associated molecular patterns. They are recognized by our inborn immune system in the brain. There's a receptor, it recognizes that, activates these immune cells, releasing, because the brain thinks, so these immune cells think when they encounter these danger-associated patterns, think the brain has been damaged. And of course, a damage means we have to engage the immune system, start an inflammatory response. The inflammatory response leads to a secretion of interleukins, hormones that are pro-inflammatory. Interleukin 1, interleukin 6, tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNF alpha, are released. You have to understand these three factors are the most active inhibitors of neurogenesis in the brain. So you have a massive blockade of neurogenesis in the brain, which leads to more reduced psychic resilience, and you are in the death therapy, essentially, which leads to a massive reduction in hippocampal size, reduction in our former memory, because the hippocampus, all the index neurons that are dying, because we have this reduction of hippocampal volume, leads to a reduction of personality. And at the same time, whatever is left of the hippocampus at the time is started to be overwritten by the narrative, the danger-associated narratives, which are put into the brain. And over a short period of time, but a longer period of time, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 years, the whole personality will become a personality that consists essentially only of the propaganda that has been instilled.
Yeah. And it's so fast. And you're actually speaking of a type of a fear-induced inflammation of the brain. Yeah. And then in addition to this, you're writing in your book about the inflammation that is produced by the so-called cure or solution to the fear. And that in itself, again, would you talk about that, how the spike protein?
Yeah, the issue is how long can you essentially make this society shut down? Of course, it's 1 or 2 years. Then you have essentially the starting point. This is a required time frame, I assume, to make people believe everything that they are told. And one thing they are told is that this is a deadly disease, which it isn't, because it's a respiratory disease, and we know from influenza the likelihood of having a severe cause of the disease, even a deadly cause of disease, depends on how your immune system acts. And if your immune system is actually in a good shape, and which it isn't, because most of the society have, for example, a low vitamin D level. And vitamin D is a hormone which regulates the genes not only in the brain, but also in the immune system. And if vitamin D is lacking, the regulation doesn't work, and you have an overreacting immune system, which is actually the reason people die of respiratory diseases, not of the virus, but of the overreaction of the immune system, which you could stop by just giving people enough vitamin D. Because about part of the propaganda we learned was nobody needs vitamin D. New England Journal of Medicine, 2022, published a paper and said nobody needs vitamin D anymore. Even if you have a severe lack of vitamin D, you don't need it. That was published in the New England Journal of Medicine by the editorial board.
So, I can't believe that.
It's absolutely weird.
Irresponsible.
But it makes both the mental and the bodily immune system susceptible, because we need vitamin D not only also for hippocampal neurogenesis, and we need it for our immune system to function properly, to fight off respiratory diseases, viruses.
And for our hormonal balance.
For everything.
Yes, for everything, yeah.
And so anyway, now we have the situation where after 1 or 2 years of further depleting the mind, so to speak, bringing the people in a state where they start to believe everything, where they can be led by fear-mongering quite easily. Then they are made to believe that this injection of the genetic material of the spike protein is the only way they can survive. You have to think about this. It's like almost like an evolutionary step that we are told has happened. So mankind doesn't need vitamin D anymore. Vitamin D, for millions of years throughout the animal kingdom, is essential. But apparently for humans, suddenly it's not essential anymore. But it's essential for surviving to have these injections in a regular spacing. Now you have to look back. SARS-CoV-1, the virus, the precursor of SARS-CoV-2, which started end of 2019, was 2002, 2003, started a pandemic which didn't quite work. But we learned a lot from SARS-CoV-1. What we learned is that the spike protein activates the same receptor that I talked about, the DAMs, the data I told you, is also activated. And here these patterns are called PAMs, for pathogen-associated molecular patterns. And the spike protein is part of these pathogen-associated molecular patterns. So the immune system has learned over its whole evolution, over millions of years, that there are coronaviruses around. And if you encounter one, we have to start an immune defense, start to engage a pro-inflammatory response.
Yeah.
So the pro-inflammatory response, pretty much like the danger we experience in the brain, leads to the production of interleukin-1, interleukin-6, TNF-alpha, and a few other pro-inflammatory cytokines. As you know, they shut down the hippocampus. Of course, in an acute infection, that's not a problem. A few days shutdown is not bad. Shut down curiosity for a few days, not bad. We stay in bed, better not
Maybe
be
better,
curious,
yes.
just relax and get over the infection. But if it becomes a long-term issue, if it becomes chronic, the shutdown is a real issue. And what we learned in 2002, 2003, in papers published 2006, 2007, these interleukins that are produced by the engagement of the immune system with the spike protein of SARS-CoV-1 lead to the production of this hippocampal, toxic interleukins, toxic because it's long-term, and lead to a shrinkage of the hippocampus. So
that was published.
That was known.
Wow.
And now the Nobel Prize was given for the injection program of another spike protein that is closely related, but has been modified. And now, listen to the Nobel Prize winners. Yeah, we had this idea 15 years ago. And I said, well, okay, 15 years ago, they had the idea, maybe learning from the experience of SARS-CoV-1, how to better, destroy hippocampal neurogenesis. We have to put more spike protein into the brain. And that was actually done. So how can I put more spike protein in the brain? It's very easy. First of all, I have to make the whole body produce spike protein. That is done by the injection of the mRNA. Then I use a vehicle for the mRNA that actually was developed to enter the brain, to overcome the blood-brain barrier. So perfect. Now I have even brain cells producing the spike protein.
The vehicle is the lipid nanoparticles.
Exactly. The third thing, and that's really where the theory, if this is all done on purpose or if it's done by accident, one could, for example, and it's how I argue in the book, I cannot prove that the virus has been set out deliberately. I cannot. I have no evidence for that. And I make really clear what is science in the book and what is my assumption. There's a big differentiation here. So my assumption is actually it is set up deliberately, but that's an assumption, and I have no proof for that. And I say that I have no proof. But the virus has been developed in Wuhan, that's clear, and it's also clear that it has been genetically modified, and particularly the spike protein has been genetically modified. And it was based on a program that has been proposed by a think tank of the DARPA. DARPA, I don't have to explain, I guess. So a think tank has proposed 2018, we have to create, if we want to make a bioweapon out of coronaviruses, we have to modify the spike protein. We have to put in a site where a body enzyme like a scissor, can cut the spike protein in two halves. That would make the spike protein, respectively the virus, more infectious. But if we look at it from the point of view of index neuron production, this modification led to the cut of the spike protein in every cell where the spike protein is produced, and we create what we call the S1 subunit. The outer part of the spike protein is now released. It's called the S1 subunit. The other part is the S2, S for spike. So the S1 subunit is now released into the body. And interestingly, the S1 subunit can enter the blood-brain barrier, can overcome the blood-brain barrier. And we have seen that already by people who have been infected, not injected by the mRNA, just being infected by the virus is sufficient that you have the spike S1 subunit in the brain, causing inflammation, causing long COVID, and essentially activating this circle, this vicious cycle of inhibited neurogenesis, fear, more easily installed. And so we have essentially two mechanisms: the DAMPs, by overreacting nerve cells, and the PAMs by the spike protein, both acting on the same receptor. It's called TLR4, and that is activating in the immune cells the whole cascade of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And since the spike protein in the brain is chronically there, we have a chronic activation. For months, we have an activation of this death cycle, this deadly cycle of inhibited neurogenesis, and that is really a big problem.
It's a frightening picture you are drawing, Dr. Nehls. In essence, if we assume, and it's an assumption, that the virus was genetically created, and there's lots of evidence also for that.
That's not really an assumption anymore. The likelihood it's not being, that this just happened by random mutation in the is essentially excluded.
Luc Montagnier said this in the very first year. But then essentially we have two bioweapons. We have the virus that itself can go to the brain, and the spike protein from the injection that goes through the blood-brain barrier. Both mechanisms create that inflammation and the reduction of hippocampal brain cells.
Exactly. The virus itself doesn't go into the brain. That's the whole idea. The virus stays outside the brain when we get an infection, but the spike protein now having this what we call furin,
cleavage site. Yes. Mm-hmm.
This furin linkage. What do you say?
It's a furin cleavage site.
Cleavage. Yeah, the word cleavage doesn't come to mind. Mm-hmm. The furin cleavage site allows essentially this part of the virus, the spike S1 subunit, to enter the brain. So, and that's made it really dangerous. And now comes the part where I said, we cannot say rule out purpose anymore. Mm-hmm. Because at the moment when people say, okay, now we have this really dangerous virus, which it isn't, because nobody would die if we had with sufficient vitamin D. It's published by several meta studies. And it's shown that nobody had to die if you provide enough vitamin D. There's a sufficient number of papers, which are also in my book. Everybody can read them. It's published, and it's clear that not the virus kills us, but the lack of vitamin D. So then I create now a vaccine, because I tell the world, and I tell maybe myself, now the vaccine is the most important thing we have to develop. And it was developed in record speed, in warp speed, instead of 10, 15 years, which we usually required for a novel. It was there in high production after not even a year. It's unbelievable. Yeah, it's really unbelievable. But let's say we believe it was not all set up already and essentially created over 10 years, which was the normal time frame.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was really just, I don't know, the Nobel Prize was given for people who have... who are record holders now. Anyway, there was a choice. Now, when I do, when I want to immunize somebody, I have several choices. Yeah. I have, for example, the choice of using a protein, the spike protein, and not mRNA or genetic material, which persists in the body. The protein would be, You stimulate the immune system, and a few days later, the proteins will be destroyed and it's gone. First. Second, we don't have to use a spike protein at all. There are other parts of the virus which could be ideal targets. We know from infections, people who survive the infection, they create antibodies, and whoever has antibodies, for example, against the nucleocapsid, another part of the have a stronger immune response and are more protected than others from secondary infections, from follow-up infections. Okay, that choice was not made. Okay, we use spike protein, which is we know is dangerous for the brain and for the rest of the body too. For every cell engaging with a spike protein is dangerous. It's really a toxin. Okay, we use a toxin. Okay, but we use a large amount of the toxin because we let our body produce as much as it wants. We modify the mRNA that it stays very long in our body, longer than a natural mRNA would do. But then comes the most important part for me. Besides that we use the lipid nanoparticles that is actually transported in the brain to a certain percentage. No, the most important part for me, which shows that there is that is not done by accident, that is not just that is really on purpose, is that the furin cleavage site has been maintained. You could have one point mutation would have been probably enough to change the protein pattern in this, the amino acid pattern in this particular site, to make it invisible for the furin scissors of our cells. It wouldn't be cut, and if it's not cut, the S1 subunit is not produced, and the S1 subunit wouldn't go in the brain. So, but they left it essentially. They stabilized the mRNA, and they left the furin cleavage site, which made it a bioweapon in what is now injected. And many things which didn't make sense for me in a long early on before I discovered the idea of my book. Many things that didn't make sense to me. One of them was, for example, of course, why let the furin cleavage site in there? But another thing was that it was propagated, even though it was clear that after 6 months there was not any shred of immunity. Quite contrary, as a study published in the Lancet from the Swedish population showed, after 9 months, people who have been injected with the stuff actually are worse off than the ones which didn't. And the conclusion of the authors was not, hey, we have to stop this program. No, is that no, it's the reason we have to inject every 6 months, because after 9 months it becomes worse. So we have to renew the injections. Now, why do that? And the only reason is, for me, from the viewpoint of the index neurons, I have to make sure, if I really, this is my goal, that spike protein, the S1 subunit, is continuously produced my whole life. Suddenly it makes sense why pregnant women are injected, why children are injected, which are in no danger, But if I really want to harm the mental immune system, if I really want to harm the hippocampus, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
This is the way to go. And now I don't have to have any shutdowns anymore. I have to no lockdowns, no nothing. It's sufficient to have a large quantity of people being injected with this stuff. And now it comes worse. Now suddenly we have this is proclaimed the mRNA program was so good. We have to engage it now for other viruses, for other pathogens, and Moderna and BioNTech now producing additional vaccines, which all are based on the same principle, and they all will lead to continuous inflammation in the brain. And even if the spike protein is not, no longer involved, if people stop believing that a large quantity of people stop believing and are relieved after a few months, a few years from the spike danger, then of course new injections will come. And on a social or a global level, of course, we have the situation where we have now these people who are through the fear-mongering narrative, overriding their own history by the new thoughts that are only danger, danger, danger. And they're all dangers. Remember, these are all dangers which are not being solved, if we really believe in these dangers, by any local government. No government can change the climate. No government can stop a pandemic. No government can stop an atomic war that somebody believes he has to start. So all these dangers require from people who are fearful and only experience fear and hold their memory is only fear, require, of course, some over-governmental institution that saves us. Somebody who is saving us. And interestingly, the group who is in the center of all that, what happened the last years, World Economic Forum, the
WHO,
Health Organization, and of course the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others. This group, even the United Nations, this group now start to say, well, we are the ones which will save you. Yeah. And interestingly, the same governments which followed all the ideas that have been made public before 2020 already, what has to happen if the coronavirus comes along. It was all, it's like a plan that now has been fulfilled. All follow now a step and say, yeah, the World Health Organization is the one that can save us, and we have to give all the rights to them. And nobody, not the majority at least, is essentially asking, is this the right way? Is this the way we want to live? No, we are the society, the larger part of society is in the process of believing that this is really what's is going to save us. And there will be no reaction to that we actually giving up all our freedom, the freedom to be a democratic society, to have a vote. And this is not just a kind of a theory. If we go here in Germany, for example, if we look at governmental documents, it's clear that in 2030 there should be a society which is controlled by artificial intelligence, that is ruled by a credit system, a credit point system that is based on how we behave regarding climate questions, how we behave regarding health questions. Are we vaccinated regularly, with the stuff that goes into our brain? If we don't, well, we have no right to live the way we want to maybe live, or which is allowed us. So certain people maybe are allowed to do certain things. Kids can maybe go to a school. If you're not behaving well, then things become questions, and it's a very, very severe development. So we have to see that this whole changing of the world regarding, Klaus Schwab talks about essentially a new what's called
reset.
It's called the total reset. But the process, what really is happening, that a new operating system of how people live together, how the world has to function, no operating system is installed.
Yeah.
And that's why I in my book I describe actually how this great great reset has to be preceded by a mental reset.
Yes.
Because if you want to install a new operating system in the brains of the people, everybody knows who has a computer. If you want to install a new operating system, you have to destroy you have to reformat the hard drive in order to install the new system that is not in conflict with the previous system, so that input and output is predictable. And that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, it's a shocking arc that you are creating here, and it makes complete sense. It really gets full circle. And I was going to show a 3-minute, maybe I put it into the edit of this video, a 3-minute excerpt of a video that I did in early 2020, where I also asked questions about the hippocampus, and where it is shown that even Google is working on taking you are calling them index neurons. In that video, they were called place cells or place neurons in the hippocampus, understanding that this is our biographical memory, and we also learn or activate place or index neurons by watching other people around us. So if we have no longer anybody to watch, then even that alone reduces the hippocampal neurogenesis, and that that Google is planning to introduce place neuron understanding into Google Maps, so that there's going to be this, at least there is already the attempt in bringing together the actual neuronal activity with digital activity, and this type of merging of our brains and our identities with a digital identity is further accelerated. And it's quite shocking what you're talking about here. I have many questions as to how this leads on to more activity of mind control, and I would love to continue such a conversation in the future. For example, the vestibular system. How is that connected to the hippocampus? Does it have to have a relationship only to brain centers, or does the hippocampus also connect to organs in the body?
Absolutely, it does.
Vagus nerve, for example.
Vagus nerve is, for example, so if we, for example, are in a calm state and the vagus is very active, then the vagus not only is essentially regulates the body, but the body regulates back to the brain. And we know that an active vagus nerve, the parasympathetic part of our nervous system, that it activates actually brain-derived neurotropic factor in the hippocampus. That's actually an active vagus leads to more neurogenesis.
Well, yes. And I can imagine that it's that whole movement that you were speaking about. I'm thinking of things like exercise, yoga even. If you think about inversions in yoga, headstands, Shirshasana, how that activates or essentially programs the place cells or the index neurons by being upside down for a moment. I mean, how regenerative this must be for the brain and for the body.
Every new experience, and I mean, part of my formula, I have a formula in the book which is called the formula against indoctrination. And one part of the formula is, besides being social, being together with others, which, for example, leads to more oxytocin, but also, of course, to more stories that are part of our learning process. The counterpart of being with others is being with oneself. So being with oneself, meaning not only sleeping, where we are, of course, completely with ourselves, but in this very important process, as we discussed, the REM sleep and so forth. But being with oneself is also time where I spend with myself, being awake, just maybe walking around, thinking about God and the world, reflecting on things that happen, yoga, meditation, all these kind of things are very important that we self-reflect, because active self-reflection in a conscious state leads to an activation of neurogenesis, and of course brings input in things that we remember. So every thought that comes along, if it has some well-being, it will be preserved and will help to grow ourself.
Fascinating. And before we go to, you have one more solution that we need to speak about in your list of how to be resilient to mind control. I would like to know what is the relationship of the hippocampus to hypnosis? Because I feel that hypnosis, even if we are not actively hypnotized by a hypnotist or by a psychologist, TV frequencies, for example, are known to create a certain amount of hypnosis, or there is subliminal messaging in videos or in films that program the mind. You see something, but you don't remember having seen it, but something remembers. Is there a relationship with the hippocampus and hypnosis? Do you know that?
Not really, to be perfectly honest. I'm not a specialist in hypnosis. I have to say, whatever I say now would be out of
Right.
thin air, to be honest.
Right. Okay. Mhm.
I'm not really a specialist on that. What I really try to be a specialist on, and I've written a large chapter on that, which will be a chapter of my future next book, maybe. But it was so important in relation to what we discussed now that I said I cannot wait until for the society to know about that before just another year before the book is going to be published. So I put it out already, and that is a very important way how to intercept or stop this neuroinflammatory cycle of death cycle, or the devil's cycle. This neuroinflammation we talked about, it engages this receptor for DAMs and PAMs, and then it leads essentially to the transcriptional activation of in the genome of these immune cells to produce all these pro-inflammatory cytokines which stop the hippocampus. And in this cascade, there is one signal molecule. The name doesn't mean anything at the moment, but the abbreviation is GSK3 beta. GSK3 beta is a signal transducer in this process. And what was found out is that this signal transducer can be inhibited, or at least dampened in its activity, reduced in its activity by an element, what's called spurious element, or what they call
I think it's
micronutrient.
yes.
Micronutrient, which is called lithium. So lithium in a very, very small amount, it's a trace element.
Trace element. Yeah.
Trace element. It's a trace element, and it's very interesting. This trace element regulates via GSK3 beta and a couple of other molecules which it engages with it micro amounts, not in the huge amounts that are almost toxic when they are used to treat people with bipolar mania, with manic depression and so forth. There are huge amounts are used, and you're close to a toxic level. We talk about amounts, micronutrient amounts of maybe hundreds up to thousands of this amount that is used in treating these people. So we are far away from any toxic effects. Actually, we are in an amount that was part of our diet in the Paleolithic age, in the Stone Age, because fish, particularly fish from the ocean, which were eating for many centuries, many hundreds of thousands of years, were actually providing us with this trace amounts of lithium sufficient to dampen this process. And it was shown that if you give people this trace amount of lithium, you break this neuroinflammatory cycle, and you come out of the brain fog that is usually typical for long COVID, or even post-vac, which are both summarized in my article as spiropatia. So the article is already in German on my website, but we're at the moment translating it into English. So it will be on the English website probably also soon, in a few weeks, and people can look it up. And what is really interesting is it was shown in people who are acutely, infected by COVID, by SARS-CoV-2, and are so severely sick based on vitamin D deficiency that they have to go into the hospital. And of course, they're not treated with vitamin D or vitamin D prohormone. Vitamin D prohormone would actually work, but was shown to realize a path that diverts from the emergency room and from severe treatment. You actually are going on a course of being healthy very quickly again. Even if you have severe COVID, if you get your vitamin D level up very quickly, but you have to use vitamin D prohormone. It's also in my book shown. But I proposed already a book which is called Corona Syndrome, which I published in 2021, that besides vitamin D, another way to interfere with the let's say, with what's called a cytokine storm of these pro-inflammatory cytokines, which are actually the cause of the severe disease, you can interfere with that by giving lithium. And that was put to the test in end of 2022. A publication of a clinical study was shown that if people come into the hospital with severe COVID, and the question is, do they survive? Do they have to get put on a breathing machine? The question is, does this happen, or do they actually survive easily and are going home after a few weeks from the hospital? Well, they treated two groups identical, besides that one group got lithium. In the group with lithium, immediately the pro-inflammatory cytokines dropped because GSK3 beta was blocked. They dropped. The time they spent in the hospital was only half the time of the not treated group. And none of them had to go into an emergency room or in an intensive care unit. And none of them died, contrary to the group which didn't get any lithium.
So the lithium you can take orally. Would you then recommend also preventatively?
Absolutely. I use lithium preventatively for 5, 6, 7 years already, actually almost 10 years. I published it already in 2015 in a book which is named Alzheimer's Can Be Cured. And 2016, I mentioned it earlier, the unified theory of Alzheimer's disease. I show that lithium prevents Alzheimer's. And actually, even if you're in the early phase of Alzheimer's development, the early stages, lithium is the only substance that can actually keep the disease on a steady level. It's the only substance given solely at microdose amounts, not in trace amounts, to stop essentially the disease from progressing. And but unfortunately, it was not very interesting for the world. And interestingly, it's still not accepted as an essential trace element, which is really strange because it fulfills all the criteria. Quite contrary, for example, here in Germany, I have to have a prescription just to get the amount of lithium in micro amounts.
Wow.
And that's really a strange situation. And I want to ridicule this situation. That's why I published that on my website. So it doesn't cost
in the
anything.
United States, it might be available, or in
It's
other
over the
countries.
counter. There you can get it over the counter, but still people don't understand that it's actually an essential trace element because nowhere in the world it's accepted as a trace element, an essential trace element.
Well, maybe they do understand. Those who can rule.
Not accepting it as a trace element means you harm the immune system because every little, let's say, infection leads to a storm of cytokines. Yeah, they could be harmful. But if you dampen the cascade, only really severe disease infections lead to a severe, reaction of the immune system. The same in the brain. If I have a little lithium in my brain, there's this neuroinflammation that is useful maybe when there's a little harm of a strong harm of the brain is not engaged, not activated by little harm. So I'm more resilient. So lithium makes my brain, my whole mental immune system more resilient. And that's why maybe one of the reasons why it's not accepted as a trace element, because the people who rule over these things don't want us to be resilient. That's the explanation that I have.
That's also my fear or assumption. So how much would you then suggest to take? Does your book detail this?
It's actually on my website. You can check it out on my website. I invite everybody to go to my website. Actually, I have a newsletter where I inform about any new developments all the time because it's an ongoing process. We learn every day. I learn every day, and everything I learn, I put out there and inform people. So, and of course, if I make such discoveries, I immediately put them on my website and inform over my newsletter. And lithium itself, I propose lithium orotate. Orotate is a certain salt of lithium, There's lithium chloride, there's lithium acetate, there's a lot of lithium different. But lithium orotate has the advantage that orotate is also essential for the brain as a substance. So there's an active transport into the brain. So you need not much lithium orotate to have essentially two possible advantages. We have more orotate, which is itself good for neurogenesis because it's required for DNA synthesis, and you have the lithium transported into the brain, which means that you don't need a lot of lithium to have an effect. So instead of I don't know, maybe hundreds of milligrams that are used in treatment of people with bipolar disorder, you need only 1 milligram as an essential dose.
A daily.
Daily, one milligram is what I use.
Well, this is wonderful information, Dr. Nehls. So to summarize, not just to give a new supplement to protect ourselves from propaganda and mind control, but you would say it's vitamin D. Keep your vitamin D levels high. Take the lithium orotate, even as a preventative dose, but also exercise, have encounters, be open to new ideas, and I would add stop TV.
Yeah. And in the center of my formula against indoctrination, which is also a formula against Alzheimer's, or a formula for a strong frontal brain battery, which essentially is the hippocampus. So essentially it's a formula for a strong hippocampus. In the center of the formula is the purpose in life. Yeah. If life itself has a purpose, we don't know. That's a philosopher question, or a question for theology. But each person experiences and feels it has to have a purpose in life.
Yes.
And that's very important. And one of the problems our modern societies are creating is that people have a purpose in life when they have work, but when they go into retirement, then purpose dissolves sometimes. Then, of course, we have no large families anymore. So meaning that people, when they get older, usually in the old ages, they become responsible for the grandchildren. Nowadays, this is not happening anymore, or very rarely. So we have to actively engage in finding a purpose in life. And one of the major purpose in life is, for me, which I propose in this book, is learn what the book tells you and teach others, and to really help to create a new sense that if we stop thinking, then others will think for us, and we already know who is doing that, and that's this cannot be good for us. Wow. So the purpose in life is essentially now preserve our freedom as a society, our ability to develop culturally, naturally, and not that a new culture, new system of operating system is essentially installed into our brains, which essentially ends all human endeavor and development. Is essentially then only artificial intelligence is the only entity that will continue to develop, and we humans essentially like animals in a zoo, waiting for our destiny, which is decided by certain technocrats. That cannot be our future.
No. This is an excellent word to conclude this very, very profound conversation. Dr. Nehls, I cannot thank you enough. This has been so enlightening. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your book. Everybody, this is the German version. The English is coming out on the 12th of December with a foreword by Naomi Wolf. And everybody needs to read this. Go to Dr. Nehls' website, which we will write into the footnotes of this report, and subscribe to the newsletter. We hope that you will be back with us. I think this conversation needs to be continued, because many ideas and many insights will follow from this. And I hope you will stay available to the audience.
Yeah, I thank you. And of course, I will be open for that. When you ask questions which I cannot answer, then they trigger, my curiosity, and then I experience more while trying to find the answer. So I'm more than happy to get more questions from your side.
Great, because we have also the possibility for subscribers to ask questions on the website, and so perhaps we collect them and come together another time. Thank you, Dr. Nehls, and good luck with all your publications, and thank you for your work.
Thank you for making this public.
Thank you. The hippocampus contains so-called place cells, cells that only show activity or only fire when the observed animal finds itself in a particular location. It was originally thought that these cells in the hippocampus, place cells, represent an absolute map of the brain's environment, of the organism's environment. However, it turns out that the map is malleable, the map is adaptive, is relative. So place cell activity is not determined by absolute space surrounding the animal, but by the animal's own history and experience of position. And furthermore, and this was published by scientists working for Google DeepMind, the place cells in the hippocampus are not only representing a relative map, but a predictive map of where the animal or the organism will go in the near future. Other studies have shown that place cell activity is also influenced or modulated by the location of other animals of the same species. That means that place cells in one animal would fire or be active when the animal is watching other animals going to the same place. The scientists are calling those social place cells. I find this very remarkable, and it makes me wonder if the whole social distancing experiment that we are observing now is perhaps really a giant experiment on place cell mapping. Is the whole mystery of space perhaps mapped or coded into the hippocampal brain cells of a species? And how does the extreme seclusion and separation that we live through now affect our brain maps? We also do not see other members of our species so much any longer moving around us, so we could receive a relative brain map. What does this do to our sense of space? And could it be possible to attenuate or eradicate a species brain map of space and reprogram it